I'm an alcoholic. My name is Tony. And today we're going to be talking about step 11. And if you haven't seen my videos before, you may be wondering, how am I qualified to talk about any of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, I recently celebrated 23 years of sobriety. I've been a sponsor for almost all of those 23 years, at least 21 or 2 of them. I've taken many people through the steps, and through the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have conducted a lot of step meetings. So I think I have a little bit of a qualification to do it. I've also been a clinical director in a treatment center that was 12-step related. I've been the program director there, so I think I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. But what I'd like to do first is review where we've been, the first 10 steps. So in step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. In step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. In step 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. In step 5, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. In step 6, we became entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. In step 7, we humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. In step 8, we made a list of all the persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. In step 9, we made direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And in step 10, we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. Now, in step 11, we sought through prayer and meditation. Well, I'll read it right out of the book. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Now, I'm working both out of the 12 and 12 and the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to work more out of the 12 and 12 than the big book, simply because the language is more straightforward. I can highlight things that are important, and I can hone in on those pretty easily. So I'm going to read a little bit out of step 11 on page 97. First, I want to say on page 96, the very first line in the book says, prayer and meditation are our principal means of conscious contact with God. So hopefully by the time you've gotten to step 11, you have a belief in a higher power. If that hasn't happened, you probably should be talking to your sponsor about that specific situation, because having a relationship with a higher power, I believe, is what this program is all about. I came into the program not believing in God at all, or any higher power. I thought we were all our own gods, and we were all masters of our fate. And when I was in treatment for the 3rd time in 7 months, somebody said to me, Tony, if you don't get the spiritual aspect of this program, you're going to die. And I believed them, because I had lost 65 pounds in 6 weeks because all I did was drink for 6 weeks. I had lost my toenails. I was yellow. And I was staring death in the face when I looked in the mirror. So I took that comment very seriously, and that same person said to me, do you believe that I believe? And I said, sure, I can believe that you believe. Well, then why don't you act as if? And I was very desperate when I came into treatment. And so I thought, all right, I need to do something, because everything that I've tried to do hasn't worked. So I started to act as if. The biggest part of acting as if for me was prayer. Meditation I had always believed in. I always thought, even though I hadn't practiced it, I had always thought that would be a great way to handle stress, anxiety, those kinds of things. I never thought of it as a communication tool between myself and my higher power, because I didn't believe in a higher power, but I never thought of it as a communication tool. I was quickly taught by my sponsor that When I'm praying, I'm talking to God. When I'm meditating, I'm listening for his answers. And so what happened to me was I started praying and meditating and doing something called toothbrush therapy, which hopefully by now you know what that is. 5 sober disciplines I do every day to stay sober. The first one is prayer and meditation. I go to a meeting every day. I talk to another alcoholic every day. I read 4 pages of AA literature every day, and I do a gratitude list at the end of the day. Those are the 5 things. But today the focus is prayer and meditation. So that is the very first line in the 12 and 12 of step 11. So if we fast forward to page 97, I just want to read a little bit where it starts talking about evidence of a God and things like that. So I'll read where I've highlighted. We liked AA all right, and were quick to say that it had done miracles, but we recoiled from meditation and prayer as obstinately as the scientist who refused to perform a certain experiment, lest it prove his pet theory wrong. Of course, we finally did experiment, and when unexpected results followed, we felt different. In fact, we knew different, and so we were sold on meditation and prayer, and that, we found, can happen to anybody who tries. It has been well said that almost the only scoffers at prayer are those who never tried it enough. Well, as I mentioned, I was desperate enough that I could act as if. And I have to tell you that it was literally within 3 or 4 days, I started feeling differently. And what do I mean by feeling differently? I started to feel hope. I started to feel like there was a chance I could stay sober. I had never had this hope. I had resigned myself to the fact that I was an alcoholic. I used to joke with people and I'd say to them, that's all I've ever wanted to be. Obviously that wasn't true, but that's what I used to joke about because I didn't think there was a way out. But 3 or 4 days into praying and meditating, I was starting to feel good, starting to feel hope. And one day I walked out of the main building of the treatment center that I was at, and this is going to sound very strange, but this is what happened. I walked out and I could hear birds chirping that I had never heard birds chirping there before. The grass seemed greener. The sky seemed bluer. The colors were just more vibrant. And I thought, this is different. And I started thinking to myself, I remember laying in bed that night and thinking to myself, I'm feeling some hope. I'm seeing some of the natural things in life sort of from a different lens, and I can't deny that I'm feeling better. And I had a gigantic ego, and sometimes I still do, but I had a gigantic ego that kept me from, just like the book just said that I just read, it kept me from really admitting when I was wrong about something or when somebody else was right. But in this case, I couldn't deny it. I was starting to feel better. Hope does a lot of things for us. For me, the 2 biggest things that happened to help me to get sober were, one, being desperate, and the second thing was kind of crossing that line into hope. Once I had hope, I thought anything was possible. So, that is the biggest part that I like out of the 12 and 12 about step 11. But that isn't everything that I've gotten from the 12 and 12. I want to go to page 105, and as I said, I'm working out of the big book too, and I'll go back to that in a second. But on page 105, as the chapter is beginning to draw to an end, it says, perhaps one of the greatest rewards of meditation and prayer is the sense of belonging that comes to us. We no longer live in a completely hostile world. We're no longer lost and frightened and purposeless. The moment we catch even a glimpse of God's will, the moment we begin to see truth, justice, and love as the real and eternal things in life, we're no longer deeply disturbed by all the seeming evidence to the contrary that surrounds us in purely human affairs. We know that God lovingly watches over us. We know that when we turn to Him, all will be well with us here and hereafter. Now, that part of it didn't come to me immediately. As those 3 or 4 days start to my hope grew, and let's call it 2 or 3 months down the road, things continued to get better. I now started to trust. I now started to have faith. And I now started to communicate with my higher power on a much more consistent basis. Now, before I tell you about that, let me go to the big book and talk about a few parts in there that I want to read. On page 86, step 11 begins, and let me just read that part of it. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with an assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Hope did that for me. It cleared my mind of wrong motives. I wasn't trying to, quote unquote, beat the system or get over on somebody anymore. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We're often surprised how the right answers come after we've tried this for a while. Again, faith becomes a part of our lives, and I come to understand that if I talk to God in prayer, I then listen for his answer in meditation. Now, sometimes the answer comes when I'm not meditating, but I can pretty much count that it will come in meditation. So to read on, what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it's not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions or ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely on it. To me, coming to rely on it meant having faith. It meant, God's going to take care of this situation. Let me ask for help from God. Let me turn it over to God. God does for me what I can't do for myself. That's happened to me over and over and over again in my 23 years of sobriety. We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask especially for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no requests for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We're careful never to pray for our own selfish needs. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work. You can easily see why. So that is the bulk of what I want to talk about out of the books. Let me just go to the end of step 12 on page 88 in the big book, where it says, we alcoholics are undisciplined. That's what toothbrush therapy is about, sober disciplines. We have to become disciplined. We have to do the same thing every day. We had no problem doing the same thing every day when it came to drinking, when it came to chasing the drink, when it came to making sure that we had enough money to drink, or we had enough liquor to drink, or whatever it took to fill us with the amount of alcohol we needed to get through every day. So we let God discipline us in a simple way we've just outlined. But this is not all. There is action and more action. Faith without works is dead. So that leads us to step 12, which we'll talk about next time. But before I finish, I want to quickly talk about how do I use step 11 practically? What is the pragmatic use of it? Well, I pray in the morning. I started when I was brand new. I used to pray, God, please help me to stay sober today. And that was my entire prayer in the morning. It ended with, at the end of the day, thank you for keeping me sober today. Today, I pray completely differently, although those two sentences are part of my prayers. So I start the day asking God to help me to stay sober. And then, of course, I talk to God about things that are going on in my life, perhaps people that are sick or people that are struggling with their sobriety. I ask for help with those things. I ask for guidance. I ask for God's will. Remember, in step 3, we turned our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. That is so important that we continue to ask for God's will. So I then meditate. Now, many people meditate at night before they go to sleep. That is not my routine, and I'll tell you why. It's my belief that to get my day off to the best start possible, I pray and meditate in the morning. So I'll say my prayer, ask God for help, and then I'll meditate. And I meditate for 12 minutes. Right? When I meditate, and it's at an allotted time that I've given myself every day to meditate, it's for 12 minutes. And for me, 12 minutes is kind of a sweet spot where I can really fall into an alternate mind state where I'm not asleep, but I'm not awake. I don't really know what's going on around me, and I can listen to what God wants to tell me. So I meditate for 12 minutes. Now, how do I continue to have conscious contact with God? I do that all through the day. I'm constantly talking to God throughout the day, asking him for help, thanking him. It's very important that we thank God, we glorify God whenever, or your higher power, I should say, but it's very important that we glorify them whenever something turns out the way that we hoped it would. I thank God constantly. I pull into a parking space that's close to the store that I didn't think I was going to get. I thank God. The light appears to stay yellow just a little bit longer and I can get through it and I'm in a hurry. I thank God, even for little things like that, because it's constant contact with God. So if I'm having meetings during the day and I know that one is going to be particularly stressful, I'll meditate before that meeting too. Because see, when I meditate, my heart rate goes down. I relax. I can walk into a stressful situation and be the best version of me that I can be. So I do that. I don't meditate for 12 minutes then. I meditate for probably 5 because I generally don't have 12 minutes to put aside. But I can always put aside 5 minutes. So I do that. And I pray and meditate, particularly pray and communicate with God throughout the day. Finally, it comes to the end of the day. Now, many of you know my wife, KJ, who is also in recovery, and she's been sober 17 years. And she's a therapist also, and has done more videos like this than I have. But we started something about 10 years ago that every night before we go to sleep, we do a reading out of a book that we have, and then we pray together. She goes first and she says her prayers, then I say mine. And it's such a great thing for our relationship. And I have to tell you, it's immensely difficult to go to bed mad at your spouse when you just got done praying with them and thanking God for your spouse. It's really hard to stay mad. So it really helps our relationship too. So that's how I use prayer and meditation throughout my day. Constantly asking for help, constantly thanking when I get the help, constantly listening for inspiration, listening for answers, and then at the end of the day, thanking God for keeping me sober again and everything else that's going on in my life. Well, that's step 11. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you got something out of it, and I will see you soon with step 12. And please check that you liked it and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Thank you.